So originally I'm from São Paulo, where I lived till I was 15. My father is an airline pilot. My mother was a primary school teacher. She's currently a tour guide. I think both my parents had quite, in some ways, opposing effects on how I thought and saw work. So I think with my father, especially when I was young, I always thought of him as just a sense of work ethic kind of exuded from my conversation with him. I was probably too young to understand the idea of a work ethics per se, but it just started with something about how he helped me with my homework. He was always just insisting to spend hours with me until we got it done, to the letter and everything perfect. And I always just imagined that, I guess it just kind of presumed from that was the way that he behaved in his work as well. And as I grew older, I realized, I think it just comes with being an airline pilot. You have a lot of responsibility over a lot of strangers every time you're flying. So I think that kind of followed on from that. Then as I got older, I think my views on him and his profession changed, particularly once I became a bit more aware of just the specifics of the role. So he was, on the one hand, it's a very technical role. You have to know a lot about the instruments which you're using to fly the plane. But when you're actually in the flight, there's actually not that much which needs doing. Between takeoff and landing, you're pretty much on autopilot unless something's going wrong, which meant that a lot of his time was just spent in kind of chatting in small chat with the co-pilots. And I think that I always found weird. I think that for me was a bit of a moment where this image of my dad as having a very serious job and taking it very seriously shifted to this idea of, even in that kind of job, and even the society views a kind of airline pilot as quite a serious job, but the actual bulk of what was being done seemed possibly a little stifling, possibly a little dull almost, I'd like to say. You get to travel a lot, so it's by no means a dull job. I think it's a great job in many ways, but I realized that the main attraction of the main time where he was spending his time in flights had very little attraction to me. My mother, very different. My mother was an English school teacher for small kids, so anywhere, I believe, from between the ages of 3 or 4 up until 10, 11-year-olds. And she always spoke of her job. She started as an air hostess, but then she moved to become a school teacher, and she always said that's the job she always wanted to do. And for her job always seemed to be a lot more personal, in the sense of she engaged with people, like individuals, and her worries were not with getting. It was always a bit more dynamic. It was always a bit more about who she currently had in her class, and that would change each year, and what lessons they're currently going with. And she seemed to. It was a lot more flexible and dynamic the way she kind of seemed to approach it. And I think I took from that, in a weird way, and possibly in an abstract way, my kind of the relationship I want to have with my primary interest in philosophy. And I think that comes with this idea of, the colleagues I will engage with, the people I'm going to engage with in terms of ideas. I do want to treat them as individuals with which I'm actually trying to understand them as individuals, as having specific ideas which I want to get my head around and have conversations with, not just become good at generically dealing with just people in general. Yeah. So I came to the UK, I think it's been 7 years ago now. I left Brazil when I was 15. I moved to Italy with my family. We moved to Monza, which is a relatively small city near Milan. And that's where I finished off my schooling. And then I moved, once I finished school, to university here in the UK, where I studied math and philosophy. And then finishing that, I moved to London about 3 years ago. At first, just to get a job. That's where I started my first office job, which was working in procurement. I had a brief stint in catering for about a couple of months, and then I moved to start as a spend analyst in a procurement software company called Barbican.
And now you're going back to university to study philosophy again.
Yeah, that's right. So after 3 years as a spend analyst, I'm moving back. I've now started 2 months ago. I started a full-time philosophy master's at UCL. It's a research master's, which means my first year is sort of a top master's, which is kind of like covering broad aspects of philosophy. And the second year, I'm required to do an original contribution to philosophy, and it's research-based in that it's about giving my own kind of perspective and like going into an existing debate in philosophy or creating a new debate and making an original contribution. It's difficult to put down what the reason is that brought me back to philosophy. I think in the final 2 years at university, when I was doing math and philosophy, I was always toying with the idea of coming back, of like what I do next. And the idea of philosophy did attract me, but I was a bit, to be honest, I didn't think I had possibly the grades or just the character, the personality to do well in philosophy. I thought philosophers to do well had to be much more, in some ways, eccentric individuals in terms of their thoughts. They had to have minds which were a lot more kind of freewheeling than I felt mine were. So the reason I chose to do philosophy, in a way what was driving me and attracting me, motivating me, was change from before I started working at Bravo to afterwards. So when I was at university, I think the relationship I had with the idea of trying to become a philosopher was very much one of it being inherently interesting, just because the stuff I'd been reading and had been exposed to had always been very interesting, very mind-opening. There was always something radically new to be explored. But secondly, what attracted me was it seemed like quite a stimulating professional environment which the profession would lead you into. You'd always be in a university campus, always meeting bright people, always interacting with new ideas, which was also part of what was scary about it, because it also had this notion of to do well in it, you had to be, it's a very competitive environment to feel like to be able to hold on to your job, you have to be saying stuff which is worth saying against a backdrop of very intelligent, very lucid, very clever people who are also trying to say what they feel need saying in their life about these, whatever it is that they're interested in. And in some ways it was simpler, it was more theme driven, just the idea of like philosophy for philosophy's sake. After a couple of years at Bravo, I think the difference there was that I had 3 years at an office job. That meant 3 years having to get in Monday to Friday, 9 a.m., be at my desk in work, which, in a circumstance which was comfortable, which was enjoyable in terms of I enjoyed the company of my colleagues, but did seem to be getting progressively less stimulating, in the sense that there definitely wasn't this idea of something radically new being picked up every other week. It was kind of refinements and repetition of the skills you picked up. And in a way, what then that drew me to philosophy was, in some ways, that office environment made me realize what my strengths were in terms of character, but also what areas which I think I had strengths in, but I hadn't really brought to the fore during my university years. So, for example, the way of approaching work, I think I have quite a systematic way of approaching essays or readings or anything really, any new project I take up. And at university, I had this idea that a good essay was one which was freewheeling, that was based off of just having a crazy idea in the night, just staying up working with it. And
how did you get that idea?
Probably because of you and Baxter. Yeah.
So certain friends you had?
Certain friends I had, which just naturally seemed to be able to have that relationship to philosophy, which have that kind of grappling, fight with the philosophers they read. Whereas, my grappling with philosophy was never as immediate or visceral. It always took a while. It always took to the end of the module before I started feeling like I was knowing what I was actually engaging with and why I was bothering to.
I understood when you first moved to London that part of the reason you'd taken jobs in London was just to be able to stay in London.
Yeah.
And to be a part of the community that you'd found, the student community at Warwick.
Yeah.
Most of whom seem to have moved to London at the end. So.
Yeah, that's true. So when I left university, I had kind of a big choice. My parents had moved to Dubai at this point, and I had two options. I could either go and find a graduate job in Dubai, pay very little tax, live at home, be able to save a lot of money very quickly, and have quite a very foreign kind of twist on my resume from the get-go. Having been from Brazil, lived in Italy, studied in the UK, and now work experience in Dubai. On the other hand, I had this idea of coming to work in London, where the main draw wouldn't have. I would be saving a lot less money, but I'd have all my friends, which I'd made during my years at university, and which had a very meaningful connection to me, and which kind of seemed like they would give a much more solid backdrop as to how I would go about making decisions, were a decision for the rest of my life. So I think a big idea for me at the time was, if I stick with my friends, not only will my life have a bit more meaning to it, depth to it, will I be having the kind of conversation which I enjoy having, but off the back of those conversations, I'll make better decisions as to where I want to go, because I'll be exposed to the kind of things which I think I naturally have an interest in. And I think overwhelmingly that's true. I think if I'd moved to Dubai, sticking with the idea of wanting to go into philosophy would have been a lot harder, mostly because it takes quite a lot of perseverance to try and apply to anything completely different. And having friends which were in academia in London helped me be able to see the excitement when I had conversations with them, and I kind of had this rekindling of what it was like to talk about academic things and just think very seriously about stuff which it's difficult to engage with in your day-to-day life. It takes some setting up the groundwork and some resilient and tenacious just engagement with the topic before you feel like you kind of get what the point of it is and where it's going and what your opinion is about it and why it matters. That was helpful.
Do you feel that moving to London in order to stay a part of the student community, that the group of students that you'd become friends with at Warwick, do you think that in any way made it inevitable that you'd end up going back to university?
I don't think it made it inevitable. I think as I worked in Bravo, fairly quickly a certain kind of career prospect opened up, in terms of a path was drawn out of which I had recruiters reaching out to me with new possibilities, both financially with some very attractive proposals, but also just conceptually, that allowed for me to kind of move into something which perhaps I would have been more interested in than the work I was doing at Bravo. And as you're kind of grappling with becoming an adult and having to pay your rent for the first time, pay your bills for the first time, figure out what it is that you want to do with your life, and part of that's what you can afford to do in your life, it was possibly less of by no means it was a forsaken conclusion that I'd go back to academia. But I think staying with the student community that I was around always kept the question kind of pretty much in the foreground of what is it that I'm going to be spending most of my time doing, and kept very alive the possibility, the reality that certain aspects of academia mean that you're engaging with questions which might not be immediately relevant to your day-to-day life, but they're a lot more interesting, right? They're a lot more engaging. They're a lot more, in another sense, pressing, because it's about the way we all live our lives and the kind of the possibilities we forget that we have in them. And I think the draw about engaging with those questions with most of my working time, it helped accentuate just how much more important and ultimately rewarding putting that into the forefront of what I was planning would have been than just thinking about where I could afford to go on holiday and aspects of just material comfort that I might have if I kept on the kind of the job series which I kind of had lined up for myself. So, no, actually I don't feel particularly like Brexit has changed too much. I think Brexit is a game changer for a lot of people. I think I've been very lucky that I've been in the UK for 5 years before Brexit came up, and seemed to be at this point quite a few guarantees as to my rights to stay off the back of it. I think it might come to be a bigger game changer in the future. I'd still quite like to go live in a foreign country at some point, and I would say it's still more of an open question whether I'll have the kind of luxury of being able to leave the UK and guarantee that I'd be allowed back in if I were to leave for a couple of years. So in that sense, it might become a game changer. I think also in possibly a bit more of a obscure way, it will be a game changer in that it probably will affect who I'll be working with as time goes by. I'll never know the people I never got to meet, but I'm pretty sure that the kind of the makeup of whatever institution I end up working in will be affected by the commitments that the kind of the UK's foreign diplomatic policy makes in terms of what the requirements of having people coming to work in academia or the wider world. So Brexit will affect me, but not necessarily in just a clear I'll have to leave by this date. I'll no longer have a right to remain.
Moral feelings about working, about having a job?
I think it's kind of difficult for me to say. I definitely feel like, compared to some of my friends or some people in my life, I have less of a strict work ethic. I do think I have a strong work ethic, but I try and stay away from this idea that any work commitment which comes into my plate, it's an imperative for me that I have it finished, and it's an imperative for me that I have to exhaust myself trying to make sure that I tick every single box which people ask me to tick. I try and keep a balance between work as self-improvement, work as taking seriously the burden that we all carry as adults of having to look after ourselves, look after our families, think about our future, but also try to be able to keep in the everyday a sense of why am I doing this today? What am I getting out of this today? How it's helping me keep in good mental health in my day to day, but also feel happy as a person which I'm living at in my day to day. It's not all about the professorship I might get when I'm 50, the book I might publish when I'm 40. Those are, I wouldn't say I'm trying to approach academia in a way that those aren't my driving motivations. My driving motivation is that I'm enjoying my day to day and the customers I engage with. It was harder in the office job.
Did you learn anything in your office job at Bravo that surprised you? Was working life in London what you expected it to be? Going back to the question we asked at the beginning about how you saw your parents' jobs when you were a kid.
Yeah, for sure. I think, again, with this question of how to approach work in terms of a work ethic, I think my dad had, not a Protestant, but I guess one way of putting it, seemed to have a very Protestant work ethic, in in the notion of work. The best workers are those the most responsible, the most organized, the most committed, the most, doing the job by the letter. And I think I have that in a sense, in everything I try to have that in the back of my mind with everything I do. To do what's asked of me, or think about what's the reason why I'm doing something and how it's going to be judged, and try to make it fit into those parameters where possible, where it's not sacrificed, where it makes sense to commit myself to doing that. And I think working an office job, one of the things which came out of that was, this might seem a weird way of talking about what I've just said, but like just getting in the morning every day from 9 a.m. And just feeling like, even though it wasn't a job which I was particularly enthralled by all the time, when I was doing something, I was always trying to make sure I was doing it well, and doing it seriously. Mostly because I knew like my not doing so would just screw other people over in the company, and and I thought that was unfair, and I thought it was just an unhealthy way of approaching it, of just trying to hide, try to get away with badly done work just because it wouldn't affect me day to day. But what I found after 2.5 years in the office and coming back to academia is that in some ways it's made a big difference. It's made my going back to studying so much easier, because now I'm just used to the idea of getting up and going to the library every morning and just sitting down, and even in days where I'm not feeling lucid, I'm not feeling concentrated, I still keep on reading. I try to be a good judge about where I have to stop and take breaks, but I try always to get something productive done and not procrastinate through it. And I think
remember
that's something I wouldn't have had I not worked in the office.
when we spoke just before you started the research masters, we agreed, we were talking about the fact that what we learned from our undergrad degrees was that if you were here having read several kind of world-changing books, expecting to have the same effect on the lives of anyone who read an essay or anything you wrote, you're probably in the wrong game.
It's funny. There was also another friend of ours was once complaining about what he learned in his degree. I think he'd done film and literature, and he said that he'd spent 3 years of his life earning a degree, and the university only taught him, I think it was 3 things. It was how to analyze a text, how to write about a text, and how to compare between 2 texts. And kind of the catch of academia are they're just like, they seem like 3 very simple things, but they're incredibly convoluted and difficult and complicated things in themselves. And in some ways it's not until you're deep within the language of those things that you even understand what it is that you've learned by studying them.
Are you afraid of anything in relation to the future and what you hope to continue doing?
Yeah, I'm afraid of not being good enough at what I want to do. At trying my hardest but just falling short, and then having to accept at a much later stage in life that I wasn't good at what I wish I'd been good at, and so I now have to pick a second best option where I've already, starting anew in a game where other people have had decades of experience in. I'm also scared of making the wrong choice, of picking something based on what I think I want in my 20s, only to reach my 30s and find out that what I now care about and what I now want is different, and then reaching my 40s and find that it's changed again. But I think with both of those, I try to take a just, I think it's a tricky word, but to be authentic about what I think I'm good at, how good I think I am at stuff, what I'm interested in, ask myself why I'm interested in that, and what does it seem like that's a lifelong interest which will develop from it. Can I see why this isn't just a fad, why this isn't just something which seems attractive for the next 5 years, but I wouldn't want to be doing for the next 30. And if I feel like I've answered those questions as earnestly as I can, I can't see a better choice to pick than going with it. That's why I picked philosophy, right? Because I think it's given me a good answer to all those questions.
Are you excited about it?
I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about it because I still don't feel like I know what my interests in philosophy necessarily are. I don't know what my strengths. I have some idea of what I'm good at, but I don't necessarily know what my strengths as a writer or a philosopher are. I don't know what my strengths as a teacher is, as a researcher is, as a writer is or are.
So kind of the same thing that you're afraid of is also what you're excited about finding out about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of it's both scary because I don't know what they are, therefore I don't know how good I'll be at them. But it's exciting because the reason I don't know what they are is because I get to figure them out and try stuff out and decide for myself and put myself out there to see how people react to stuff. Now I have a certain amount of confidence that if I do this earnestly and if I work hard at it and I keep at it and I'm earnest about my judging of what I've produced, I will improve in terms of whatever, the way I want to judge my work and get to a point where I'm happy with what's coming out of the other end of that.